That's fine.
I'm not always saying goofy shit.
I should hope so. Hello, everyone. The 0 viewers that are on so far. This is being broadcast, though, so I have to stop being goofy for the time being. Probably. I don't know if I can. This webinar may have failed before it began. Hey, folks coming on. Welcome to the webinar, Let's Talk About Sex, baby. It's not actually in the title, I just put it there. I'm excited to see all of you. Put in chat where you're calling in from. Hey, Devreem and Luis and Christopher. I am currently in Brevard, right outside Asheville. Just finished a weekend leadership training, and I'm hanging out with my company. We're meeting in person for the first time ever. It's crazy. So go ahead and post where you are. Olga and Ben and Emma. We've got Costa Rica, Maryland, Philadelphia, Portugal, Ventura, Austin, Moscow, Massachusetts. Awesome. All over the place. Welcome. I'm glad that you guys showed up today. So, I have a question for you all just to think about for a minute while we're getting ready to start. And I sent this out in the pre-email, but just to have you guys think. So a lot of the webinar today is actually going to be about, the content of the webinar is about how do we talk about sex with partners. And the reason that this intrigues me is because I've had a lot of conversations that went more or less well about sexuality with partners. And it was something I never realized before that you could actually talk to people about. I thought it was just like, either you have good sex or you have bad sex. And if you have bad sex, you probably don't stay with the person. And then I actually got into authentic relating, which is the main practice that I do. And I started finding that, wait a second, you can talk about anything, even sex. And that was kind of mind-blowing for me. So the question I have while we're setting up is, what's the best conversation that you've ever had with a partner about sex? And you can noodle on that for a moment, and then I'll tell a quick story. I'm going to try to get rid of some of my bars. We've got more folks in Alabama, Holland, Brevard, where I also am. Laura's sitting right next to me, actually. Johannesburg, Maui. Great. So the question again, what's the best conversation you've had with a partner about sex? Just to consider. And what made it good? So here's a short story. I had a partner for a while with whom, when we met, there was like a ton of intellectual chemistry. We co-worked for a while. He was pretty good at kind of slowly courting me. If you co-work with me, it gets you on my good side usually, and I get less scared of you. Not necessarily an invitation, but we got to be friends, and then we started considering dating. The only thing was, I didn't feel super attracted to him. It just didn't feel like we had a lot of physical chemistry. We just had different ways of touching. And in my world at that point, it was like, either you have good connection or you don't. There's not an in-between. But when I called him at one point and I said, I just don't think this is going to work. Like, we don't connect well enough. And he said, well, I still want to be connecting with you, even if we're not romantic. And that, first of all, was mind-blowing for me, because no one had ever before, when I had a conversation like that, said, oh, but I still want to keep, connecting with you. They'd said that maybe in a friendship sense, but not in a like maybe we can still be partners even if we're not having sex. I felt so blown away by the answer and so downright safe that I was like, well, maybe I do want to try out partnership with you. Um, and I was like, well, I don't want to give up the possibility of this being sexual if it could be. And I said, let's try an experiment for a month. For 1 month, I want to try actually working on making better physical connection. And let's see if we can change this thing that I consider unchangeable. So we tried it for a month and we did a lot of the things that I'm going to introduce in this webinar. Um, and it turned out that you actually can change physical connection. Um, and that man and I are still partners today, over a year later. About webinars that I might want to do and topics I might want to talk about, sex came to mind as one that's been huge for me to discover better communication around. I hope this is helpful to you too. We'll talk a little bit in this webinar about how do you set up a conversation about sex? How do you have the conversation? And some like top tools and games that you can use to make it even better. And I'll actually send these out afterwards. And then at the end, I'll tell you a little bit about a course that I'm developing that helps make these conversations really easy to have and really easy to integrate into your life, because even if you know the tools, it can be hard to have the conversation. But I'm going to do my best to give you all the tools to get there. So let's dive in. First of all, initiating the conversation. When to do this. I don't recommend doing this just as you're about to get into it. Sex the conversation is ideally something that could happen a bit before you're actually about to jump into bed, and then pause and be like, wait a second, tell me what you really like and don't like in sex and how our sex has been for you so far. You don't necessarily want to go mental when you're about to get into physical space. Not a hard and fast rule, but I like actually saying, okay, let's find a time to have this conversation. Maybe an hour to a few days before. And one reason that I love doing that is because at least for me, trust actually creates turn on. So having the conversation itself is sexy. You can also have the conversation after you've had sex, kind of like a retrospective, like, hey, would you tell me how that went for you? Again, I would suggest maybe leaving a little bit of time between when the act ends and when you have the conversation. I've had a partner who immediately after sex really wanted feedback on like, how was that? And how can we make that better? And it's like, can we cuddle first? Like, give me 5 minutes. You can even check in with your partner about when would feel good for them to have the conversation. I'm curious how many of you are like me. How many of you get turned on by feeling like your partner wants to hear what you like or what you don't want? I'll just leave a sec for you guys to maybe post some answers to that. So here's a question. This is interesting. I'm actually going to pause for a second. This isn't webinar related, but I'm in a company retreat right now, and we've just had really intense conversations with each other, because when you do authentic relating constantly, it's not just job, it's also life. And so I'm kind of coming down from this emotional wave of, being with myself and my company mates while we talk about life and death and tensions with each other and what's coming up in life. And so it's like I'm also in that emotional somatic space, trying to come back out to actually thinking. If I stumble over my words a little bit, that's what's going on. And I actually feel more relaxed saying that. I'm loving the talk in the comments about how many of you get turned on by hearing like your partner wants to hear your desires in sex. So, continuing, setting up the conversation. I wanted to put this in because not only it can be valuable not only to choose the time for the conversation, but also really to like set it up well, almost like you would set up a date. Um, so finding a comfortable space to have it. You know, do you guys want to have it at home? Do you want to have it out at a restaurant? Do you want to have it on a walk? What makes you feel most comfortable? Uh, touch. Is that something that you want within the conversation? Do you want to be need to need? Do you want to be holding hands? For me, I get really like much more relaxed in my body when I'm actually touching somebody else. So I really like that during conversations. Um, and the last one is ritual. Ritual, very simply, like demarcates a space between where we've been and where we are now. We have so many distractions and things in our head all the time in modern life that it can be really great to just say, okay, I'm going to light a candle, or like, let's just sit down and take a breath and be present to what's here and now. So have some distinction, whether it's a change of space or a change internally, um, a moment or two, a kiss, to actually decide like we're doing something different right now. And then having the conversation. I'm loving some of these comments. Conversation during sex can be great, even laughter during sex. Yeah. You can even explore during sex how it is for each other and what your partner would like more of. An interesting thing here, I think one of the reasons I focus on having this conversation before or after is for me, I actually have a really hard time asking for what I want during sex or communicating. I kind of get a freeze reaction, and um, sometimes I can speak up, or if my partner asks me a question, I can speak. But for me to create safety, it's actually really helpful to have spaces set aside to talk. And that feels really loving to me. And that's often created big changes in my sexual connection with someone else. Um, so having the conversation going into that, um, first of all, setting context. If you've been to my other webinars, you've heard me talk on this a bunch. But I think it's absolutely crucial because conversations about sex can be edgy, right? Like, is our partner talking to us about sex because they really don't like what's going on? Um, am I going to have to talk about things that I want that I'm like really not willing to talk about yet? Or as someone put in chat, like, I might feel like I'm not entitled to pleasure. And so having the conversation might be hard. So setting context is like ritual, like changing space, a way of saying, okay, here's where we are now. Here's what we're doing now. And it just looks like sharing why you're having the conversation and try to present it positively. So, not, I want to have this conversation because our sex sucks, but more like, I want to talk about this because I love you and I want to deepen our relationship. And sex is one part of that. Uh, Personally, like, I get like a little turned on or like really happy just like thinking about a partner taking the time to like, hey, I'd love to have a conversation with you about how to create more pleasure in our relationship. Would you be willing to like sit down to talk about that? Like, that's sexy to me. That's setting context and setting aside space. Um, the next thing is to actually consider, how do you want to have the conversation? What's the format? One way I love doing it is to let one person speak and then the other person reflects and says where their own desires align. So rather than just kind of ping ponging, this is what I want, this is what I want, it's like, this is what I want. Oh, wow, I hear that you want this and this. And like, here's the places in which I might love to do that too, or at least where I hear you. And then the other person gets a chance to speak. You can even set a timer for each person to make sure both of you get a chance. And I really like trying the model of plus delta rather than critique. So what's good and what could be better rather than, what's good and what's bad. Yeah. A model that I want to give you guys, that I talk about actually in the online course that I'll tell you guys about at the end. It's got a couple different models for how to have conversations, but one of them I call ARR, ARR. And it's assess, reflect and reassure. Just a bit of a mnemonic that maybe can help you have that conversation fluidly. Assess is first just like looking at the space. Like, is it the way you want it? Asking the person, do you feel comfortable? Are we in a space to be having this conversation? Are you really tired or triggered with me? Like, the conversation about sex is a good one to have when both of you are in, like, a fairly good space with each other, because it can be an edgy conversation. Um, and then reflect. So throughout the conversation, just, you know, so I'm hearing you say that you really love being touched slowly, and that, like, maybe I could use like this quality of touch with you. Making sure you're actually getting what the other person is saying. Um, and then lastly, reassure. This is really important, especially if we're in potentially intense conversations. Just telling your partner throughout, like, I really love the way that you touch me already, or I really love the way that you tell me things after we've had sex. Um, and like, I'm not having this conversation because I want to break up with you. Like, just if you notice someone's like system getting like heightened, they're kind of tensing up, or they're leaning back, or their voice tone is getting like louder, or just different signs of them actually not feeling safe. A really good thing to do in that moment is either to check in, like, hey, how are you doing? Or just say, I really appreciate we're having this conversation. Like, reassure them. That tends to lower the tension. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about a way of being to hold how while you're having this conversation, um, and that's non-assuming and curiosity. So treat it like it's a normal conversation. Like, you might not know what your partner is actually saying. If they say, I really like soft touch, what does soft touch mean? Like, try actually like touching them. Like, is it like this? Are there particular areas that you like it on? Like, really check. Like, don't have an assumption that you know what they're saying. There's this beautiful discovery in the conversation about sexuality and in sexuality in general. Like, it's embodied play. And if we're going to address it from a mental space, then finding a way of bringing it into the body and bringing curiosity can be a beautiful way to deepen. Something about this that's important to remember is that there's a difference between meeting a desire and welcoming a desire. So you can be a yes to your partner having a desire without needing to meet it. I can be a yes to my partner wanting to use whips and chains and be like, wow, I love that you know what you want in sexuality. And like, that sounds like it would be super hot. And I'm really not into pain play. So I don't know if I'm the person that can fulfill that for you. How does that land for you? Is that a definite need for you that you would need me to kind of at least be open to exploring? And is there a way we can meet in the middle? Like, I don't have to say yes automatically just because I hear something. You can ask more questions, like, where would you like this? How? With whom? What would it look like? How can I support you in getting your desires met? Imagine someone asking you those questions about something you're turned on by. Thanks. We had a snoring dog in the background, if you heard that. Laura just nudged him. So along these lines, having a relationship with your own desire is really important. Something that was a big bum for me in the past is if I tried to have conversations about what I wanted, I first had to figure out what I wanted. And I had spent so much time shutting down my desire that I didn't have any idea of what that was. Like, I was responsive in sexuality. Whatever my partner did, I would like be mostly a yes to. And if I were a no, I'd like quickly leave the relationship because I couldn't talk about it. So figuring out that there were things that I wanted and how to ask for them was really important. So that's one reason why I really like having a conversation before or after, so I can like feel into my desire. I can access it. I can own it. I can be honest about it. And then I can maybe try different things with my partner. I can say, hey, would you be open to trying this? I don't know if I'll like it or not. I don't know if there's a way to get okay with your desire without being willing to be vulnerable about it. And it's a little unfortunate because, like, it's often really scary for us to be vulnerable about these things. Desire, especially for some reason, like telling somebody that, I like polyamory or I like kink, um, these things, like, I have this, like, almost like freeze reaction, like, well, they're not going to accept me now. Like, I can't say that. And we end up in relationships for years where we don't actually know what our partner wants. Um, I was having a conversation with my parents a few months ago, and they were sitting on the couch together, and I asked them, like, uh, well, what type of touch do each of you like? And they looked at each other and they went, we've never asked each other that. They've been married for, it's going to be terrible. I don't know this, but at least 30 or 40 years, at least 30 years. And they've never asked each other what type of touch they like, because talking about these things is really difficult. So, um, if you don't know what your desire is, just like leaning into exploring it, like saying the things that you do know, asking to explore the things that you don't, can be really valuable. And just trying on, like, can I reveal one more thing? Can I reveal one more thing? And if you're really scared of it, just ask your partner for the response you would like before you state it. Like, I want to tell you something that feels really vulnerable to me. Would you be willing to hear it and then just, like, tell me how you felt hearing it? Or just tell me what you heard. Like, give yourself a bit of a buffer space before you get a response that could be intense. For me, accessing desire actually isn't as much about describing fantasies as it is about establishing trust. I have a question for y'all that you can consider or you can put in chat if you feel brave enough. And that's, what's a desire that you would like to have met in sex or relationship? Just take a second to think about that. Mm, this is beautiful. Maddie posted the shame narrative for me, that is that by making a request, I'm using this person. Yeah, that's one of the reasons it's so difficult to ask for what we want. There's like this like enmeshed thing between asking and using, between, I'm going to say what I want, and then the other person is like going to give it to me, and then I'm not going to feel okay with it because they didn't naturally give it to me. And this is the place where, like, we get into this spot, right, where we're not necessarily enjoying sex, but we don't want to ask for something different because then we'd be using the person, and that's wrong. The thing that misses is the other person's agency. And sometimes with a person that has trouble saying no, you may have to ask several times, like, are you really okay with this? Or, like, would you even give them options? Like, would you be more comfortable with this, or if we got into it this way? Like, would you be more comfortable being blindfolded, or if you just closed your eyes? Or, like, when you actually feel into yourself, like, if I hadn't asked for that, would that be something you'd naturally suggest or be a yes to? Do you feel excited? Do you feel a little bit scared? Like, take a little bit more time to explore if you're not sure the other person can fully, access their own desire. But I don't think it's using someone to, tell them what you want. I think it's actually one of the most beautiful things, gifts we can give in relationship, is to tell someone else how they can love us best. Um, yeah. I have a couple people posting about what they might like in sex: the joy of surrender, kinkiness is a factor of trust. Nicholas asking, how vulnerable can we get? The video will be public beyond the event, but I'm not sure if the chat will be. I can't promise. I also can't promise that I'd be able to delete comments on it. So maybe as vulnerable as you're willing to have it seen publicly. While you guys are considering that, I'm just going to give you one more factor in actually having the conversation, which is to welcome what is. I've had this conversation sometimes with partners where the conversation actually has ended. It seems like we're not aligned enough to continue in relationship, in a sexual relationship. But what kind of relationship are we aligned enough to continue in? For me, the thing I'm most committed to in connection is honesty. And so If a relationship has to change from being sexual to non-sexual or romantic to friendship, I'm open to that. And I want to figure out, like, independent of labels, like, what do I want with this person now? It can really help to know, like, what you're committed to in the connection in the moment. Like, are you really committed to making sure that you serve your kids best, for instance? Which might mean, like, discerning, how if you're going to break up, like, how you might do that, or like what that looks like. Are you most committed to honesty, of, like, you know being in just the connection, no matter what, regardless of the form? Are you most committed to actually healing trauma in relationship and feeling safe enough, which might mean setting a relational container, um, of, like, this is the only thing we're going to explore during sex, or, like, we're going to press the boundaries with these things during sex. Like, know going in, part of setting context is knowing what is your intention, what is your desire here. Okay. Um, I'm going to give you guys a couple of best practices, and I'll send these out in an email afterwards. I'm really excited about this bit because these are the things I've actually used, aside from having the conversation, to play um, during sex with, like, alignment. And the first is a touch game. Really simple. One person touches the other any way you want. Doesn't have to be sexual. It's ideally better if it isn't. And the other person just gives a 1 to 10 of how much they're enjoying that touch. It could be, enjoying the touch on the part of their body. It could be like that they're just enjoying the quality of the touch, whatever. Set a timer for about 3 minutes. And at the end, like, ask, like, what had you enjoy those touch? This is actually the game that I played that most transformed my relationship, that I talked about at the beginning with the partner, that our touch styles really didn't align. We didn't align sexually, but we played this game a couple times and it was like, oh, that's what you like. Cool. Got it. I can do that. It's kind of magic. Another is to play a game called Would You, where you just ask things of your partner. Would you give me a back massage? Would you, for some reason, the example I keep going to is tie me up. And I think it's because, like, the classic, kinky thing in sex is to be tied up or blindfolded. But I'm sure there's other examples. I just can't think of them right now. Would you tell me a bedtime story? That's not sexual, but it can establish trust. You can even, and the other person can say yes or no, or they can renegotiate. This is also a really good one for working with someone that has a bit of trouble, like, accessing their own desire or saying no, is to play this game, to have them practice, like, what does it feel like to be a no? A cool way to play this is the other person can't do anything unless you ask. And one last one is to describe different parts of your partner's body, like how they occur to you and what you appreciate about them, and just go part by part. Like, what do I consider beautiful about your arm? How do I perceive your stomach? I had an experience with this where I was dating a partner at one point who I considered out of my league. Like, he was just beautiful physically, and I grew up very awkward and dorky, and so I felt constantly insecure every time I was around him, until we played this game. And so, the way you do it is you play that, you give appreciations, then the other person can just say, like, how it felt to receive that and how they feel about their body. And it was so healing, hearing directly the things he appreciated about my body. I was like, okay, maybe you consider me beautiful too. And hearing the things that he felt about his, and that he had insecurities too. So there's something I find really healing about this game. And there's a couple questions that are also really good for, figuring out what someone else wants and exploring this sexual space. I'm not going to give them to you now. I'll send them out after the webinar. One more thing that can be helpful is having personal practices of embodiment. I find the experience of sex really different with someone who has an embodiment practice versus someone who doesn't, because there's something about actually having to live inside your body that lets you read subtle signals. So having, like, getting into dance, like blues or contact improvisation. I love contact improv for people who say that they can't dance, because it's like a very can't dance form of dance. Contact improv or ecstatic dance are kind of like whatever you want them to be. This could be, doing Tai Chi. This could be uh, capoeira, anything that has that kind of fluidity of like, this is what it feels like to actually be inside my own skin and ideally in contact with someone else and having to read them. Authentic relating also, I'm biased, but I think is a really good form of this. You'll naturally learn to read each other's bodies and emotions. And finally, for those of you who are looking for ways to actually invite your partner into sex, I have 3 very special suggestions. The first is just ask, want to bang? That one works really well. You could try the classic hip thrust motion while staring directly into their eyes. Or there's a song that I've heard of that's really good. I think it goes, let's get it on. So that playing on repeat, total turn on for the ladies. Cool. So those are my main suggestions on having conversation about sex. And there's one other thing, which is, like I said at the start of the webinar, I know that having these conversations can be tough, and not just about sex, but about relationship in general and how to deepen connection and even like seeing what you want and the places in your life that you want to change relationally. There's a really painful thing for me where I've often started seeing these places and then not knowing what to do about it. And I can go to workshop after workshop, but those are like spaces divorced from real life almost. And so I've spent the past year developing a course that is meant to actually walk you through relational change in your life. I noticed myself actually like kind of getting trembly talking about it, like, oh, there's something that matters to me here. It's like vulnerable talking about something where it's like I've given away all this information and now I'm asking you to invest in something. But legitimately, the people who have gone through this say that it has changed their relationships with their partners, with their kids. It's easier to be honest. It's easier to be vulnerable. It's easier to know what they want and to ask for it. It's a 9-week online course. And there's 2 versions of it. One is self-paced, so you can go through it at your own pace. That's a monthly subscription. And the other one, which actually starts in just about a week and a half, I believe, is the next cohort, is one where you get to go through those 9 weeks with the help of a coach, with a new module released every week, and with an accountability triad that you actually get to practice with. You get assignments every week to try on, games like Would You, and exercises like identifying the spaces in your life that you would like to improve relationally, the relationships you'd like to change. You get like distinct models for how to have conversations, how to change those relationships, how to take agency in each part of your life. It's called Authentic Life Leadership. And there should be a button popping up in chat. Or a button popping up actually on the video that will give you guys a discount to the course. And it's actually only available for the last, like that discount is to get, more than $100 off the course. And it's only available until the end of this webinar. So if you want that discount, click on that now. Because if you listen to the end of this, to me, that means that you're willing to like work on your relationships. And I really respect that. I think that having connection is hard, right? Like it's not something that we get taught when we're young. And I want us to have full support in actually learning it, not just inside a workshop, but every day in our own lives, like the skills to, like some of the things the course teaches, like identify situations you want to improve, see what's creating them, ask for feedback from people in your life about how you show up so you can see yourself from the outside, make requests, discover places you want to take agency to change relationships or conversations and have simple models for doing so, hacks for deepening conversation, ways to actually access curiosity, how to fight like the boss battles of authenticity where the other person doesn't want to receive your truth, and developing emotional resilience for when someone doesn't want, isn't actually open to you, or your truth lands badly, or, you just run into a tough situation. Like, how do you be okay even in that? And the courses, videos, assignments, resources every week. So that is talk about sex and talk about better relationships. Oh, and one last thing. I am teaching live in Austin in about 2 weeks, and there's still a couple spots left open for that. And I've kind of been going into like hermit mode, just writing more and trying to take more time and space. I find my system has gotten more sensitive as I've done more of this work. And I actually really am enjoying that. And so I've been teaching a bit less. And if you do want to come and see me teach live, I have a leadership training in Austin, November 9th to 11th, the Authentic Leadership Training. And you can look that up on my site, Authrev, AUTHREV. And that would be really fun to have you guys at and see your faces live. We had a couple people from the Authentic Life Leadership course actually come to the training this last weekend in Asheville. It was so cool to like faces that I've seen on screens. In that course, I do a Q&A every month for all the students, and the coaches do calls every week. So every month I get to see all of your faces on screen, and you get access to me for anything you want to ask. So if you have any questions on those courses or on sex in general, feel free to post them in the chat. I saw seeing a comment in chat about it's hard to express a desire where you don't know the reaction or the ability to read feedback. That's actually a really great comment. I think that is one of the scariest places to express desire, is if you're not sure how the other person is going to react, or if they do react, you actually can't quite tell what's going on for them. Some people, like if we get triggered when a desire is expressed, we go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? Like we either want to come back at the other person, like, I don't want to do that, or run away, like, I'm just going to go, or we freeze. And freeze is almost the hardest because like it's hard to catch when the other person is in freeze. They might go a little bit more still. Yeah, it's hard to see. And so if you are experienced at reading those body language signals, which like I said, authentic relating or dance or other embodiment practices can help with that, or the Authentic Life Leadership course, I think actually helps with that a lot as well. Then you might notice these signals. And if you don't, I just would err on the side of checking in more often. Like ask, like, how is this landing for you? How are you doing right now? And then, really listen and check. Like, is there a change in the person's voice tone? Like, are they like, I'm fine? I think a lot of us can read that doesn't always signify fine. You may just have to listen a little more carefully. And if you really can't read it and you're not sure, give the person some time to consider it. Not all of us have an easy time responding in the moment. So it can actually be really good to say, hey, I want to leave this conversation here for a couple hours, just so both of us have some time to process and integrate. And let's come back to it and talk about it. And if you have any more insight about what you want or how my desires land, let's talk about it later. Some people don't process well when they're just hit with information. They actually need time to let it settle in their system and figure out where they're at. It also helps to maybe, close your eyes periodically throughout the conversation and just say, like, let's check in for a moment, see what's happening, where your desire is. It sounds like for the course, the button appears above the video in the screen, so you might need to scroll up.
Or down.
Technical difficulties. Or down.
It's down on mine.
It's down on Laura's. Up, down, right, left. If you press up, down, A, B, you get an extra discount on the course. Kidding. Only if you have a Sony PlayStation controller that you're hearing this webinar on. That's a great suggestion. I think the games would be great for me to try with my wife, but I notice I'm feeling vulnerable even to ask her to play. Um, I think the last line is any suggestions. I'm having trouble seeing the comment. Um, yeah, totally. Um, let's see. Any suggestions for how to approach the idea? I would first just like have the conversation with her about like, hey, would you be willing to like, um, do you have an interest in improving our sex life or trying anything new with it? Like first figure out if the desire is there on the other side. And stay with it. If somebody says no, you can ask more like, can you tell me what came up when I even asked that? That's actually kind of a softer way than, why don't you want to? Like actually just ask about what was the reaction? What happened in you? And then if she says yes, that she's open to it, or if she speaks fears that you actually feel like you can address, um, like, oh, I'm scared that you're going to say that something's wrong with our sex. And so I don't want to have the conversation. You could be like, no, that's not why I want to have it. I actually just want to see if there are things that we can play with because, I really love our connection already. And if we're going to be together for years or a lifetime, um, I think it might be fun to explore with each other. So you can start there and make sure that she's like a yes to even playing with things. And then ask, like, I think it could be easier for us if we had some contexts, like some ways to try things out um, that are just simple. Would you be willing to play a game with me? Oftentimes, just that format of, would you be willing to play a game is really valuable. But yeah, leading into it by making sure that the other person is even open to like having the conversation is, I think, a less vulnerable way of doing it. Or you don't even have to ask with the touch game. You could just like next time that you're in connection, just even like start touching and just ask her like, could you give a 1 to 10 of how much you're enjoying this? Um, Nicholas, I actually don't know if I saw your question. It's a little bit hard to be doing the video and responding as well. Can you repost it? And if anyone else have questions, feel free to post it in chat. I will continue staring at the screen until people type more things. This could get awkward. Actually, I have to say, even though I'm filling the silence, something that I think often gets missed in relationships is the ability to just be silent with each other, especially in sex or leading up to it. Even just eye gazing for a moment, dropping in with somebody, not having to fill the space. Nicholas said, I asked if my questions about what I could share was helpful in this type of conversation. Oh, how vulnerable can we get? Okay, I'm sorry. I assumed that you meant in the chat on this video. It sounds like maybe you were asking how vulnerable can you get in the relationship? This is interesting, the time delay on chat. Actually, and that is interesting, even if I'm misinterpreting this a bit. It can be good to ask your partner, like, even what their like level of comfort is with vulnerability. I find that in conversations, it's sometimes easy for me to get like a little bit overwhelmed, and I have to ask my partner to pause. So like part of setting context could be like, if one of us gets overwhelmed, let's just like have a pause button to like integrate for a minute. Nicholas, I'm not totally sure if I understand the question, so maybe we can chat offline on Facebook or some such, and you can clarify it for me. Was it helpful that you asked that question? I think so. I always find questions useful in any format. Cool thing about doing lots of authentic relating work is you can't really be surprised much anymore. And so like there's a pretty wide range of acceptance for just about anything. Ben, I have a lot I'd love to share on the topic, but not publicly. That feels true. It feels like pretty vulnerable doing a webinar about sex. I'm like, how much should I give personal examples? How much should I like, actually play the Marvin Gaye song? Not totally sure, but hopefully I towed that line well. And of course, like, that's why it's hard to talk about sex, right? Because having the conversation publicly feels vulnerable. And if we can't talk about something publicly, it's also hard to talk about privately, how to section those parts of our lives off. I think that's one reason that relationship can be hard because, we're talking to other people in a friendship mode every day or in just a stranger mode, but actually being with someone, being in private spaces, like it's not like we get a lot of practice with that. At least not when we're young. And if we don't have relationships often, then not very often. It's almost like a very loaded thing. Like you have to be to learn how to be in relationships, but people don't always want to get in relationship if you don't know how to be in relationship. And in sex, it's kind of the same. Like you have to actually have the conversation or speak your desires or explore your desires to know what your desires are and how to have the conversation. But it's not going to feel safe when you first start having it. You may get hurt. The other person may not be open. They may get triggered by what you say. And so like really being okay with holding like a space of just like, I am going to be with what comes up, and I'm going to even like the intention I'm holding is having this conversation for practice. That in itself can be enough. If you have other comments, questions, I'm open to that. And I'm excited for those of you who are going to be joining us in the course. Seems like a couple of you have gotten that already, and I'm really excited to see you on the Q&As and in that context. I think one of the reasons actually that conversations about sex and relational conversations in general have gotten easier for me is because writing that course and then like taking it myself forced me to actually get more concrete about the tools and skills behind authentic relating. Like not just here's a game, try it, or like here's a workshop, go to it. It's like, no, like what would it take to develop authenticity in everyday life? And I think the course teaches that. And the feedback we've gotten seems to show that that's true. We have a number of people going through it again for their second time in this round. So it's pretty powerful content. And for me, it's actually been really amazing to like think about like, there's a section of the course on making active versus passive requests. And it really made me think about like, where in my life am I asking for something by insinuating that I want it? Like, you haven't called me all week. That's actually kind of a request of like, would you call me? Or that sex was okay. Might actually be a statement of, I'd really like to like have better sex or talk about it. Actually taking agency over our own lives and actually being honest in them is really hard. And I think having support in that is useful. Laura, can I steal your charger? Yeah. Computer's about to die. Okay, great question. Luis asked, how can we get out of the trap of wanting to be better and the relationship to be better and never being satisfied? That's a great one. I think the appreciation piece can be really for every thing that you appreciate or everything that you have a criticism on, try to find at least 3 things to appreciate. Like make it an intentional practice. Thinking to yourself, like, what am I grateful for? What's working well for me in this relationship? And thinking about like, I use this frame of superpower and kryptonite. I teach this a lot in both the online and in my live leadership trainings, which is like the things that are kryptonites that are like difficult have corresponding superpowers. So like, for instance, if my partner, uh, like let's say they're pretty like assertive in relationship, and that bugs me because it's hard for me to actually like, you know, kind of then come back at them. Like it feels like they're dominating the space. The corresponding superpower to that is like they can hold space for me, and I feel safe around them and I feel supported. Um, and so if I take away the assertiveness, I'm also taking away the safety and the support. So like really considering in relationship, what are the personality trade-offs that we're making when we ask someone to change? Uh, and what is the corresponding appreciation to the thing that I don't like? Um, can be valuable for having this type of conversation and for valuing the way that the relationship is. Um, and if you notice that you're getting stuck in process, like don't keep processing it. Take a walk, give an appreciation, watch a movie together. Like it's so easy to get into the hole of like, let's make it better, let's make it better, let's stay in bed until we like figure out everything about our sex life in this one session. Like take a break, do something else. Your relationship's still going to be there when you come back. Mhm. I hope that answered your question. It's funny, I want to have more content to talk about around having these conversations. And I usually pull from examples in my own life. But I'm at a space right now where the conversations I'm having with partners are more like, hey, um, I actually want to draw back for a little while and be in relationship with myself. And that's a really hard conversation to have, actually. How to be okay with making my relationship with myself as important as my relationship with other people. And then really reassuring the people in my life that I still want to be around them and that I still love them. And that's actually led to really amazing connections. But it has me continuously checking back in of like, can I be okay with the person I am rather than the person I want to be, who would just be like open and like total yes to everything and like leaned into life. And it's like, right now I'm in a phase of leaning into me. It feels good. Hmm. I think Nicholas clarified his comment in the context of having a conversation about sex. Is it helpful to ask how vulnerable you're allowed to get? I think a version of that, yes, although I wouldn't phrase it like that because there's a way that uh, to me, if I heard that, either I would like say you can get as vulnerable as you want because that's like the automatic reaction, or I would feel like a little bit of defensiveness of like, well, like, do you think it's not okay to be vulnerable? Like, did I give that signal? So like, um, I do think either having that like pause button idea up front, like, hey, I want to be really honest, and if either of us get overwhelmed, we can say pause. Um, I would start maybe with like somewhat milder topics and like see what your partner's reaction is. If they seem open, you can move into edgier ones, or just really ask them before you share something. Like, oftentimes, if there's something vulnerable for me, I'll just say like, "Hey, I want to share something that's really vulnerable. Are you open to hearing it?" And just kind of setting that frame and asking for that permission allows the person to open themselves up, or to say, actually, I don't think I can receive that right now. That's really helped me in giving vulnerable shares when I don't fully feel safe to do so. And again, like if you get a less than good reaction or a defensiveness reaction or I don't want that, it I wouldn't take it as like, oh, I did something wrong. A, that's this individual person, and uh, B, people have like different preferences and we don't know when we hit each other's triggers. So like if you can in that moment expand and like hold yourself and take a deep breath and even be able to ask about your partner's trigger, like, okay, like what came up for you there? Or it seems like that was intense for you. That is like an incredibly loving act. Or at the very least, like taking a minute and trying not to take it personally, but just take it as this person's preference. Ben says, I'll say this, being seen sexually is an important part of feeling accepted, which builds the trust needed for healing shame. Yeah, I love the quote that wounds formed in relationship can only be healed in relationship, um, which is why I get really passionate about teaching how to have better relationship. We have just a couple minutes left, and I'm curious if there are any last things you want to say, or you're welcome to say goodbye and chat. I'd actually love if you post anything that you're taking away from this conversation, anything that you learned or that struck you. Just had a desire to write a poem about the vulnerability of staring silently at a screen when you know people are watching. Mm. So I'm saying the thing I took away is to think about rephrasing questions with a softer tone, like, how do you feel, and not, you made me feel. Yeah, that's a great one. And Laura's apparently taking me away from this conversation. I may have misread that, but given that she's sitting next to me, I kind of like that. Awesome. It was so nice being with all of you. Thank you for tuning in. And I hope to see some of you in the course and hopefully others of you online or in real life someday soon.